Hello everyone, Helen Blunden here. Hope you're happy, healthy and well. It is time for a new book review today, and today I have the pleasure of sharing my life lessons learned out of this book called The Spaceman from Bohemia. If you are thinking, have I heard of that book? Well, probably. You may have even seen it on Netflix because Adam Sandler is going to be playing the character from this book. This book was published in 2017 by Jaroslav Kalfař. This is his debut novel, and I must admit I did read it in a few days, but I can't put my finger on what kind of genre this book is, simply because it is a mix of a whole heap of different things. I think my video review here today is going to be a bit of a jumble as I try and grapple with a lot of the different themes that are in this book. Now, I mentioned that the genre is all over the place. You can call it a science fiction, and I think I actually found this in the science fiction part of our library, but you can also classify it as a romance, you can classify it as historical fiction, you can classify it as philosophy, you can classify it as non-fiction, you can classify it as magical realism, you can classify it even as a literary classic, simply because the writing of this book, for a debut novel, I found it quite surprising. I guess two parts to the book. The first part of the book I found way more intriguing and interesting as it battled with philosophical questions, and the second half of the book felt more like a novel for me as it wrapped up all the, I guess, unfinished questions that we had. It's a book that you can't guess what happens, simply because it goes in ways that you just never saw coming. When that happens, you also start to question your own beliefs, you start to question why the character might be going through this, what certain characters are. I know I'm being mixed up here, but let's tease this. The book is about Jakub, and he is a spaceman. He's from Czechoslovakia, and the Earth has seen this purple dust that is in around the Earth. The powers that be, all the countries, basically say we need to get an astronaut up there to investigate what this purple dust is about. And Czechoslovakia comes to the fore because Czechoslovakia, which, as I understand, has this history of needing to assert itself based on, I guess, what had happened just before World War II with the what's called the Munich betrayal in this book, where Czechoslovakia didn't even have a say when the Allied powers of the time had handed their country over to Hitler in order to prevent war. So I felt as if there was some kind of, I guess, need for Czechoslovakia to show the world that they have been beyond that now and they can lay a claim on the world. So they send Jakub up to space. And while Jakub is up there in space, look, a lot of things happen even before and during this whole event. He investigates the purple dust, but while he's up there, he has this creature, this spider-like creature, come out and actually query him and ask him questions. And in fact, we start to think if this creature is actually a figment of his imagination, or if it is his consciousness, where he tries to grapple some of the things that have happened in his past. Now, what has happened in his past? He has a love interest, Lenka, who is married, and he loves a lot, but they can't have a child together, or they're desperately trying to have a child, but somehow it never comes good. There's also the fact that he recounts and has these flashbacks to his childhood years, where he grew up in a household with his grandparents because he had lost his father. And one day they get this visit from a dubious guy who basically then tells, and it comes out, that Jakub's father was actually a communist collaborator and he tortured this person at the time when Czechoslovakia was under communist rule. This whole part of the novel is all about Jakub also trying to come to terms with what his father did as part of the communists, and also how his grandparents dealt with his father's political leanings, and also how Jakub himself felt guilty that somehow he had to redeem his name, his reputation in Czechoslovakia. And so that is the reason why he took on this suicide mission to go and investigate the purple dust. So that is, I guess, the main first part of the book. In it, we also learn about the fact that he goes through his training program, and there is a psychologist or a psychiatrist who tracks his every move and actually gets him to investigate and explore his past and come to terms with his past. But we also find out that Lenka has left him, and while the Spaceman of Bohemia is up in space and he learns that Lenka has left him, he starts to unravel in some ways, and he starts to query why she might leave. And he also then asks the Space Mission Control to try and find the reason why Lenka leaves, and he's given a whole heap of recordings afterwards where the psychiatrist and Lenka talk through the reason why she left Jakub. So that's the first part of the novel. The second part of the novel is a little bit less philosophical, but it makes us think in certain ways. What happens to Jakub is he goes to space and he gets into the purple dust, but he gets saved by a Russian phantom ship, a phantom spaceship, meaning that the Russians are up in space, but they haven't let the world know that they're up there, because they're really looking after their own interests and also making sure that, they have their interests at hand. So he gets saved. But what happens in part two is a little bit, I'm not going to actually say it here because I don't want to have all these spoilers on the book, but let's just say all the loose ends are tied, and he goes back to try and find Lenka, and something happens there, but then he ultimately returns to his home after he has confronted the man who was tortured by his father, and this man shows him some home truths, I guess, and who also is up for corruption charges already in the capitalist government of Czechoslovakia. Part two wraps up all of part one, but it makes you think about what is this book actually saying to us. While I was reading this book, my life lessons for me is that I felt that, man, this could be a school text with lots of historical references to Czechoslovakia and the situation there politically, and also what happened post-war and with the communists. The tension between a communist regime and a capitalist regime, and how the leaders of one, after a fall of a government, become, I guess, the ostracized of another. But yet even a capitalist regime does not always hold the answers, because in both political situations people are out to help themselves. It doesn't matter what you are or where your affiliation lie. It kind of, I'm not going to say balances it out, but in actual fact there's no good news on either extremes. The themes I got out of the fact that the author was giving us also an idea of the type of life that was in communist Czechoslovakia, and the snippets of how life was with his grandparents, and how in some cases it actually was quite good, quite nice. I'd say that quite loosely, based on the connections with family, based on the connections of a simple life, based on a connection of a regional life. But at the same time, a capitalist society was also good because it gave people opportunities. But again, I found that there was this balance in this book that kind of showed the good and the bad, the yin and yang of both the capitalist and the communist system. Same system, different rules, I guess, but the choices that you make at the end of the day, who you decide to side with, and you're then part of history. And just because you side with one side doesn't mean that down the track it'll change. and you'll ultimately change your position, I guess, in life with the next. What are some of the other themes? As you can see here, I have written a whole heap of different themes that have come out of this book, and that's just why I say that it should be a school text for, say, Year 12 education system for high school students to really understand deeply about the philosophical arguments that are in this book. The themes are all about guilt, love, redemption, politics, history, atonement, and even revenge. They're big, big themes. The space creature, this spider-looking space creature called Hannes, is all about our consciousness, our own thinking, our own need of being able to look into the mirror and actually ask some hard questions about who we are, what is important to us, why it's important, who have we come from, and what regime or system have we lived under that has shaped our thinking. And then going forward, how is this thinking helping us or hindering us? The one big thing that I also understood out of this book is this concept of a grand gesture. You know, in our early years, in our younger years, we always have the need to become famous or to become known or to make our mark in the world or to work on grand projects or to have a great job or to do something that we are remembered by, to do something that we feel that we need to redeem our name or something about. And as young people, we strive for that. And I know I've done it in my younger years. But there comes a time in our life where, as we age, as we get older, these grand gestures don't seem to account for much. They leave us a little bit empty, a little bit vague, it's vacuous. And despite people telling us that we should do better, we should strive for grand gestures, we should be able to do what we want and how we want it, and they push and prod us to do it. Ultimately, though, it kind of leaves us feeling empty. And when, I guess, in our quieter moments, we start to think, what is truly valued in our world? What do we truly value? And we look at it as being love. It's the fact that having people who we have loved in our lives. And also, another element of this book and another theme of this book that the author Kalfař was saying was that we're here in this world. We have one life. We have one life. And we may as well be here to live it and have a little bit of fun. Ultimately, these grand gestures that we had as younger people to be able to do something, to prove ourselves, to redeem a name or redeem ourselves. And redemption, I think, is one theme very strongly in this book, where I felt that Jakub, as being the spaceman, decided to take this. He knew it was a suicide mission given to him by the capitalist leaders who were then done for corruption, who pushed him and goaded him that he should be the one to go up there. And he felt guilt because he had something to prove out of his family name, because he was ostracized. His grandparents were ostracized, being the parents of a communist collaborator. So he felt he needed to do something for his country to kind of correct that. Ultimately, though, it wasn't corrected in his own, I guess, transformation, because he had let go the love of Lenka that he saw a bit later on, of him not being there and not seeing wholly that this is what he should have concentrated on, not this grand gesture of going into space and redeeming something or making correct something that is incorrectable, if that makes sense. It happened in the past, and it is what it is. You cannot correct the past. It happened. It's you move on from that, and you think and you pick out elements in your life that you feel is now for you. So this book, even though I couldn't pick the genre, I couldn't pick what happens next because it was so unpredictable. It is a book that I've not read a book like this, especially for a debut novel. It has flashbacks to history, to history of Czechoslovakia, of history of the Munich betrayal. They called it the Munich betrayal. In other parts of the world, they call it the Munich Agreement, but you can understand that Czechoslovakia felt betrayed, and I do feel that the character in this book did feel a sense of guilt and betrayal on the part of what his father played. I would say that there are also, for those of you who are triggered by animal slaughter, then this book is not for you, because quite earlier on in the piece, he does talk about, I guess, obviously being in a regional village with his grandparents, they have to slaughter some animals for food, which is pretty typical. Yeah, just some trigger warnings here. What else can I say? It has elements of the absurd about that spider who loves Nutella as well, and likes to learn what Earth is doing, and who gives philosophical questions to Jakub to think about. There are, I guess, the absurd nature of the Russians and what happened there, who thought, one of the Russians thought that Jakub was their Messiah and who had to save him so that he could go back to Earth and actually spread the word. Ultimately for me, I found this with just so many themes and so many things that I had to think about, and everything just was a swirl of different lessons. I think I connected to this most simply because I understood Jakub. My own background was that my father was in a similar situation to his father, given that the reason he came out to Australia was to prevent the ostracism of a family that had, after World War II, had sided with the communists. Anyone who wanted to, or understood, or followed the philosophy of communism was basically on the outer. You couldn't get a job, you couldn't find work, people stayed away from your family. It just got difficult. So a lot of people from Greece had migrated out to Australia. Even though I too understood where this book was coming from, it also made me think of my own situations and the conversations that I overheard as a child in my own family home, and at the time I couldn't understand them. It's coming out now more and more as I grow older, and as I see the way of the world and how the world is going now politically in a lot of countries. Ultimately now I guess I am seeing and feeling those same, I guess, sentiments that was happening in my own family, and possibly obviously in the family of this author as well. While it was hushed or quietened or whispered when I was a child, you couldn't help but feel that there was something there. And only now as an older person, and what I'm seeing in the world, are the things kind of the jigsaw pieces are falling into place, and that's where I start to think, you know, what is the meaning of the world? What are we here to do? And ultimately, I would say that the theme of this book, that we are here to live and have a bit of fun, I would say is pretty spot on. Quite a deep book, and a book that actually, makes me think as well, and it's touched me in a big way. Maybe I overread too much in it, but then again, maybe that's me in books. So I'm just going to leave it here. Thank you for listening, and thank you for watching. I look forward to seeing the movie, and I would highly recommend this book. Let me know what you think if you have read it. And that's it. Thanks for listening, and thanks for watching. Bye for now. If you're interested, this is the notes that I made out of the book. As you can see, just different blobs of themes connected with colours, lots of questions as well. When I do read a book, I like to kind of mind map all the themes, but this particular book I struggled with simply because there was just way too many themes and philosophical questions that made you think. So ultimately it was all about, you know, that was the aim, basically, to go up to space and figure out what this purple dust was. But it was a lot deeper than that. We have all sorts of different themes, and ultimately this was the life lesson of the book, despite being in particular systems. The themes that I wrote, the fact that I thought the spider was his consciousness. We all have, I guess, something in us that questions us, that makes us think, that allows us to look into the mirror and ask ourselves quite deep questions. This concept of the grand gesture in order to be able to redeem or do something that is quite big in the world, but in actual fact leaves us feeling quite empty because we haven't really figured out the true meaning of it. Even though I didn't mention this in the video, people in his life that he came across who kind of figured it out earlier on, like his astrophysics professor, you know, he seemed to be a little bit more, I guess, less goal orientated, but there was a reason there. You know, some people figure out that they don't need grand gestures, they don't need big stuff. They are quite happy with their lot in the world to continue with life. Ultimately, this is what I've basically meant. I think this should be a school text for high school students to really delve into it. I haven't even scratched the surface of this book. There is just so much in this, and ultimately it's all about this. Maybe in some way also starting to think about this, the whole him being in space and then having to come down to Earth is similar to like a rebirthing. Like he had to be born again to try and understand more about the world and to fix what he had thought of up there in space. I don't know. Anyway, God, so much. He also even reminded me of Yossarian in Catch-22. There was so much in this book that reminded me of Catch-22. Oh well, okay, best I stop now. Otherwise I'll keep going on and on.